start? Oh, I guess the answer has just been provided, is that we're going to record this so that if you aren't here now, welcome to the future, wherever you are, whoever you are. Thank you for participating. My name is Hunter Merritt, and I am privileged to be here this morning to help kick us off for day one of a two-day virtual event. Welcome to the 2022 Nevada Watershed University. So, woohoo, you made it. You're here. I'm seeing 29 participants, now 30, and the numbers are going to go up, I hope, as we progress through the day. My goal in the next couple of minutes is to give you a comfort level with this platform so that you will feel empowered to navigate around and consume all of the great stuff that we have at your leisure, and also not just sit back and watch. It's not a TV show. This is interactive. So I'm going to go to the next slide here and point out to you a few of the features, and I'm going to linger on this slide for about 2 whole minutes while I tell you what you're looking at, and you can try them all out. So lower left, you can see that closed captions is an option for you. So you can click that and read along and watch a closed captioning of the speaker. If you do want to speak up, and we're encouraging you to do so, you can hit the mute button and unmute. If you hit it, it'll be red. If you hit it again, it'll be green. If you hit a little caret to the right of it, a little arrow, it'll give you audio options to switch to phone or computer if you need to switch. If you have an audio issues, you might want to switch. You can start and stop videos. I would love to see you when we hear you. So if you have a hand raised and want to speak and someone calls on you, please turn on video so we can see you. For those of you who are going to share materials, you know that you have a share button here. Some of you, not all of you, have a record button if you're a host or a co-host. And then here, I want you to try hitting the emoticon palette, and you can hit any kinds of emojis. We're going to have opportunities to give feedback. Yeah, Andrew, good to see you. Run fast like a rabbit. Elizabeth is on fire. Excellent. You can hit recognize hand gestures so that when you wave, it waves. Kind of crazy. You will be asked to at least give us some feedback through your emojis at the end of each presentation so that people have some. Yeah, Debbie, Nikki, thank you so much. That's awesome. There are, of course, lots of different options. If you do leave the meeting, you can take the files with you. At minimum, you should probably pull up the participant list, see who all's in the room. I see 36 right now, and chat so that you can say who you are, where you are. In fact, put your name, your email or phone or both, and where you're, what organization or affiliation you're with at this point. So type that in chat just so that people can kind of associate. Here's the fun part for another minute here. Hit annotations and let's scribble all over this thing. You can hit that little squiggly on the upper right-hand corner. You can hit the text tool, and you can draw on this board. I do not mind. It's okay to draw. We can do all kinds of things. Yeah, there we go. So while you are drawing and while you are annotating and while you are typing your name in chat, and Danae Olsen is putting an arrow there, I want to point out something, and I'm going to circle it with my big purple marker. I'm going to circle, purple's not a good one. I'll put an arrow up here, pointing out to you. This little part on the upper right hand sort of says sharing interagency collaboration in the picture. Right now it's sharing Watershed University 2022. As a non-presenter, you can click the little drop down arrow and you can see that we have all kinds of materials in there that you can navigate to at your leisure. So go ahead and do that and then come back. I'm going to go about 30 more seconds until I hit the next slide. And when I hit the next slide, wherever you are, if you're over there looking in Dave Cavagnaro's presentation, you're peeking ahead. Shame on you. You shouldn't peek ahead. Actually, no, I just told you you should. It's okay. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. And then when you are wherever you are, I'm going to unceremoniously yank you back to my slide that I want to show. So as the driver of this, the presenter, the person with the ball, when I hit the next slide, it's going to pull you away from wherever you are. And that concludes my icebreaker coffee networking test of the system here. So there we are in time, and I have a few more minutes while we are doing this. Thank you, Bunnies. Great to see you. So I don't see that anyone here is a telephone only participant. So I see names, and that's awesome. If you did phone in, if you do phone in, or if you see a phone come in, you know, you can maybe tell us who that phone number is, or if you do phone in, come off mute by hitting *6 and saying, hey, I'm here on the phone only. And one of the hosts can rename you so they know who it is that's listening and who's speaking. I'll give you one more chat opportunity, or you can come off mute and say hello and tell us, what is your favorite body of water or watershed in Nevada? So since we are Nevada watershed focused, I will invite you to type in the chat in the next minute here, what watershed or body of water is your favorite to visit, or maybe where you can say where you're from. Okay, awesome. I'm here. I'm seeing some lakes. I'm seeing, you know, are there any rivers going on here? Is there a river that folks want to jump into? I'm going to show you a picture of a body of water that is barely in Nevada. In fact, it was the tallest body of water that I've ever stood next to in Nevada. But I'll do that tomorrow when I share a picture of where I was. Is Tim here? I'm going to scroll down and see. Tim, you are here. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you saw me on the trail. Thank you. Yeah, this is great. Okay, favorite body of water in Nevada. This is awesome. All right, and I am about to hand it off to, I can't remember if it's Danae or Lindsay or Sarah, but I'm going to hand it off in just a minute. Does anyone, I do see one telephone number, 775 ending in 36. If you are here on the phone only and you are on mute, you are invited to press *6, introduce yourself and tell us your favorite body of water in Nevada, if you have one. 775 to something, ending in 36. Telephone number?
This is Eric from Truckee River Flood Management. I'm not sure you can hear me, but I'm trying again. But anyway, favorite body is Tahoe.
Is Tahoe. Awesome. All right, Eric. I'll type it in chat, and Danae or Lindsay, as hosts, co-hosts, you have the power to rename that number as Eric. Thank you. Welcome, Eric. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, couple more seconds. With that, I'm going to go on to the next slide and let you read and let someone else speak for a moment, but I'm going to hang out in the back and chat and engage with folks on the side. I will invite you to look at the bottom here and note that if somebody had requested CECs, we need to kind of know about your participation in this. And I think at the end, there's a survey. So your engagement in this, especially for the CEC credits, is important. For the rest of you, I can say that I have a deep and abiding appreciation for Watershed University because I've been involved in it since, I guess, the beginning. There's a model in California, and I'm super excited to see that Nevada has picked up that model. And even my friend made the logo. So I'll tell my friend that the logo got used. Danae, I'm going to go on mute, go off video, and hand off the presenter ball to you. All right? Hey, everybody. Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hunter, for that introduction and getting us kind of warmed up here for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the start of the 2022 Nevada Watershed University Summit. And as Hunter had mentioned, Watershed University actually started in California and has been led by the California Silver Jackets for the last few years. And we are super excited to kind of take after what has been really successful for them as a virtual kind of structured event. 2 days, 2 half days, covering a whole variety of topics. And for this Watershed University event, it's going to be on arid regions specifically, so really catered to Nevada's landscapes. So as you can see here, it's a free educational and networking opportunity designed for professionals in floodplain management, water management, emergency management, and related fields. And we are pre-approved for 3 continuing education credits for your participation here, both today and then another 3 credits for tomorrow as well. So really great opportunity there. As part of the registration, if you did send a registration over to the Nevada Silver Jackets email, you may have noted that you would like to receive credits, and we've recorded all of those requests, so thank you for that. But feel free as well if you'd like to add that into the chat, or if you didn't manage to register, if you want to add that into the chat here, if you'd like to receive continuing education credits for your participation. And after the event, we will be sending out certificates for that. Alrighty, so just real quick to go over the agenda for today. We're going to quickly talk about the wonderful program Silver Jackets that has brought us here today, followed by a weather report from the National Weather Service. We're going to hear some case studies on floodplain management, the differences between floodplain management in the north of Nevada and the south of Nevada. We're going to have some opportunities for breakout groups to have some more kind of close mingling opportunities and networking, get to know kind of who's on the call today. We'll take a quick break, and then we're going to hear about flood after fire in arid regions, and then we will wrap up for today. All right, any questions before we kind of go into the Silver Jackets portion of our agenda today? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get into it. Okay, so again, welcome to the Nevada Watershed University event today. And Lindsay, do we have the slides here? Is that separate?
Yeah, if you click on the down arrow that's in the upper left-hand corner, you should be able to find your presentation.
Excellent.
Should be labeled
Okay.
01 Day 1. Yep.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. Okay, and we've gone over just a little bit about the background of Watershed University. So we're going to get right into Silver Jackets. So Silver Jackets, the Nevada Silver Jackets specifically, is the effort, the program that kind of brought us all here today. And the common goal for that program is to reduce flood risk. The teams are comprised of state-led partners, and we have regular meetings for the Silver Jackets. I believe with Nevada, we have at least annually, if not biannually. And if that's something that you're interested in tapping into and learning more about other Silver Jackets efforts and ideas for future projects, please just let me know and we can add you to the list for that. The type of projects that come out of the Silver Jackets are based off of competitive project proposals. So every year we meet with our state partners and we go over all of the kind of the compilation of ideas that has been received since the last cycle, and we talk through what could be most beneficial for the communities who are interested in having a Silver Jackets project. And then we work to get some in-kind contributions. So we have there's always an in-kind partner at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, and we try to get as many partners on board as possible so that it's a really kind of comprehensive, and we're working from multiple vantage points and kind of tapping into the different resources that each agency brings to the table. The wonderful thing about the Silver Jackets projects is that they only last 12 to 18 months. So you see things kind of getting done very quickly, and right after initiation of the project, there could be activities like workshops, it could be webinars, it could be an emergency action planning support, tabletop exercises. There's all sorts of different non-structural flood risk management activities that Silver Jackets can produce. So the larger goals of the Silver Jackets is to reduce flood risk through non-structural means, include or enable flood risk management action, and to directly protect life safety, reduce or prevent increases in flood risk, and increase resiliency. Okay, and excuse me, now I'm going to, and I just realized I don't think I introduced myself. I'm sorry for kind of rushing into it. My name is Danae Olsen, and I work with the Army Corps of Engineers out of the Sacramento district. And part of our area of responsibility includes a great portion of Nevada. But now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the state, Miss Sarah Fichtner, if you want to come on.
All right, thanks, Danae. Yes, my name is Sarah Fichtner. I'm the floodplain mapping coordinator for the state of Nevada, and one of the leads for our Nevada Silver Jackets team. So, all right, Danae told you about the goals of our Silver Jackets team. Let me give you the details on our current projects. First of all, our First Avenue is the forum we're all attending right now, so woohoo, it's good to be here. Second, we wanted to develop our pre-existing resources for improved access for Nevada educators in time for Flood Awareness Week, which is next week. This meant polishing up our Nevada rivers story maps and creating brochures to make sure our accredited lesson plans are as accessible as possible for teachers that are, really strapped for time and resources. Next, our team collaborated with City of Reno to install a high watermark sign in Wingfield Park. The sign actually includes a QR code that will lead users to our website where they can, peruse background material on flooding in the area. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. Last, you can find our Silver Jackets team at outreach events in Gardnerville, Carson City, and Reno for Flood Awareness Week next week. And to learn more about these projects, you can visit our website, nevadafloods.org, and we can put that in the chat in just a moment here. Next slide, please. All right, our next current project does not have quite so many moving parts to it. The flood risk mitigation workshops focus on Nevada success stories in floodplain management and provide information on grant opportunities to fund future projects. We'll have a recording of our last workshop on our website this week. We've got one more event coming up. If you would like to attend, please reach out to us, and we'll get back to you if it ends up being a virtual event. Next slide, please. All right, our last project that's ongoing is a floodplain management plan for the South Fork Dam, and this is the only state-owned dam in Nevada, and creating this plan will facilitate acquiring grant funding for dam upkeep, and will hopefully encourage other owners of high hazard dams to follow suit. Next slide, please. All right, Danae, if you don't mind speaking on this one really quick.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, thank you, Sarah. So the other project that is not just Nevada specific, but it's tribal and available for tribes in Nevada as well, is the Tribal Flood After Fire Workshops effort. And this one is just kind of being initiated. I talked to the project manager for this one, and she said they're planning on a spring workshop. So Nevada tribes are welcome to participate in that. And if you are interested in participating, or you have someone who you think might be interested, you can contact Melissa Weimiller, and I will add her information to the chat. Thank you.
Okay, and just really quick, this is a newly awarded project with for our Silver Jackets team. And kind of building off some of our previous work, the Comprehensive High Watermark Campaign will seek to install more high watermark signs across Nevada, and we'll have, like I mentioned before, we'll have that QR code on the sign, so the public can walk up to the sign, scan the QR code, will be taken directly to our website. Where there'll be, flood history content. They can access, they'll be routed to our story maps that talk about, each of the rivers in Nevada. So a really great interactive piece. We're looking to hopefully put high watermark signs in maybe Vegas, Caliente, and wherever else there may be interest. So if you're in Nevada and you're in a community that you think could benefit from a high watermark sign, please let us know. All right, and that is all I got.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. All right, we're going to turn it over to our partner at the National Weather Service, Mr. Chris Smallcomb. And Chris, feel free if you'd like to share your screen, or you can drive the slides from WebEx. I can make you the presenter.
Okay, yeah, actually the WebEx will be just fine. Well, actually, let me share my screen because I think some of the text falls off. So let me just
Okay. Okay, sounds great.
Share the whole screen here. Let's see, share. Okay, so now we're going to get going. Again, my name is Chris Smallcomb. I'm the meteorologist in charge here at the National Weather Service in Reno, and that's our one of our many friendly lizards overlooking the office from our amazing view that we have. And so what we're going to talk about today is two very important sources of precipitation for the Great Basin in Nevada: atmospheric rivers during the wintertime and the monsoon during the summer time, and kind of the comparison and contrast of each. So on this, let's see, let me set that. What we're going to look at here is just a schematic of the ratio of wintertime precip in blue for various sites around Nevada and summertime precipitation in green. Now, the actual numbers, you probably can't even make them out, and they're not that important for the discussion. But what is important is the relative levels of each. You notice that for most sites, the blue outweighs the green. So for most areas in Nevada, the wintertime precip is still the dominant factor. There's a couple of sites, though, a little corridor here around Highway 6 from Tonopah to Ely that actually get a slight majority of their average annual precip during the summer months from the monsoon. So as a whole for Nevada, the cool season rain and snow are still the most important beneficial precip component when you're talking about flooding, for hazardous impacts, but also drought mitigation. The wintertime precip really does set the majority of the stage for all of that. But the monsoon can really still make or break a water year in much of Nevada. There's been plenty of examples where, the wintertime was kind of, lukewarm in terms of how much beneficial precip we got. And then if the monsoon was really good, that helped kind of stave off some more serious drought impacts, especially across the southern and eastern parts of the state. But then we've had years where the monsoon just totally failed, didn't show up. And, we go from like a D2 to a D4 on the US drought monitor because of that lack of warm season precipitation. So it is still an important factor. Now, closer to the Sierra, so closer to, say, Reno and along Highway 95, the wintertime precip is a vast majority of what we get for the annual season. So in the wintertime, typically a lot of that comes from atmospheric rivers. And so that's what we're going to dive into first. This is winter's moisture tap. And these are essentially giant rivers of humidity, of water vapor that come off the Pacific Ocean, often as far as Hawaii, sometimes as far as even the Philippines during some of our bigger flood events here in northern Nevada. You probably heard the term Pineapple Express, the moisture coming from Hawaii. Well, we've actually had the term the Mango Express or the Mango Connection when some of these atmospheric rivers extend all the way into the West Pacific, just bringing giant amounts of moisture. They slam into the coast of California, and then they go up and over the Sierra. And so it rains out, snows out, a lot of the moisture from those atmospheric rivers. So, and then the question is, how much of that makes it into Nevada? And so that's always a key forecast challenge is do we have spillover, which is when there's plenty of moisture and it makes it past the Sierra crest, kind of a giant sponge. It still has plenty left over once it gets onto the east side. Or do we have more of the rain shadow where the atmospheric river kind of squeezes out all its moisture on the west slopes of the Sierra, and then there's not much left over for the Great Basin. And then the other thing that can happen is actually atmospheric rivers can kind of scoot around the southern Sierra, say through Southern California up into southern Nevada. So those are scenarios where places like Las Vegas can get significant amounts of wintertime precipitation from atmospheric rivers that get around the Sierra. So this is an example of one of the more significant atmospheric rivers we've seen in many years. This is about a year ago, October of 2021. And you can kind of see here in the satellite image, look at all the clouds and moisture that extend all the way out toward Hawaii. That is the reflection of that atmospheric river moving into California and northern and central parts of Nevada. This was actually the strongest AR to make landfall in California over the last 40 years. The rain shadow in this case was non-existent. In fact, Reno picked up 3 inches of rain in 2 days, which by itself is 40% of the average annual amount. Just an amazing storm. 10 to 15 inches of the rain in the Sierra. And, the one thing in terms of flooding and hazards is this storm occurred at a good time of year. The ground was really dry, so it had plenty of absorptive capability. The lakes and reservoirs were low, so they had capacity to store all the rain that fell. Had this happened in January, this could have been a very significant flood situation for the central and northern parts of Nevada. If we had a snowpack and a cold ground plus all this rainfall, that would have definitely been a different story. And so, atmospheric rivers, they produce a variety of hazards. There's some, flooding in 2017 that we saw here in northern Nevada. When they're rain shadowed, we get the high winds, these lenticular clouds there. You can get wind gusts over 80 miles an hour. And then up in the mountains, plenty of snowfall with, people probably being out when they shouldn't be and driving through those conditions. So the one good thing about atmospheric rivers, you can usually see them coming many days in advance, 5 days or even more at broad scales. Of course, it takes until we get within a couple days to really ascertain, is this going to be a big flood or is this going to be a big wind event? That kind of stuff. Atmospheric rivers are big for coastal areas along California and the West Coast. But the key for Nevada is how far inland does all that moisture get? And that's what I was talking about earlier. Does all the moisture get squeezed out on the Sierra and then we're just left with dry, windy days? Or do we have plenty of spillover? Is that atmospheric river so intense, has such a big sponge of moisture that there's still plenty left over for Nevada to get some beneficial rainfall? So as mentioned, that's one of the big forecast challenges is spillover versus the rain shadow. Most atmospheric rivers are actually beneficial, especially for the mountain areas. We can see 50% or even a little bit more of our annual precipitation and water supply from just a handful of these significant storms. So every time you hear atmospheric river, it doesn't automatically assume it's hazardous. In fact, most of them are beneficial. But if we have atmospheric rivers that are strong, meaning they have a lot of moisture and or a lot of wind energy in them, or if they're repeated, that latter one is probably the most important thing. If we get 2 or 3 ARs in a row, that's where we get our hazardous weather. That's where we get our huge snow buildups, the wind and flooding issues, especially if the rain snow lines are really high. And those are critical for the flood versus snow determination. Often we need the rain snow line to be above 8,000 feet. That would be more of a flood situation. So more of the precipitation is coming in the form of water instead of snow. So, to the point of how ARs affect our climate, you can see a diagram here comparing the winter of 2017 on the left, which was a giant winter for northern and western Nevada in terms of the percent of normal precip, over 200% of normal there. But then you look at 2022, this most recent winter, and it was all about that one storm that we had on October 24th of 2021, and that really only benefited the Reno, Carson City areas. The rest of Nevada really didn't benefit a whole lot from because of the lack of atmospheric rivers during the wintertime. So they are a big driver for our climate. Now, let's switch to the summer monsoon. And historically, this has been a big element for the south and east parts of Nevada, but northern and western Nevada can benefit it as well. And so what is the monsoon? This is a nice graphic from our friends at NWS Las Vegas. It is effectively a seasonal wind shift. During the winter and spring, most of the jet stream, the storm track, is coming off the Pacific Ocean, keeps all the tropical moisture to the south. But then in the summer with the monsoon, that jet stream lifts a little bit further to the north, and it allows some of that tropical moisture to come around what's called the Four Corners high pressure cell there. And so you see the moisture coming around from the tropics, sometimes even the Gulf of Mexico. We can get a tap there, but most often it's the Gulf of California or the Eastern Pacific Ocean that can bring moisture up. And then in years where the hurricane season in the East Pacific is active, some of that moisture from those tropical cyclones can also make it up into the Southwest U.S., Southern California, up into Nevada, Utah, and certainly Arizona and New Mexico. So effectively, the monsoon is a change of the wind pattern as we go from spring into the summer months. So what do we get from the monsoon? Well, we get some pretty significant hazards here. And okay, come on. There we go. So this is actually a really impressive time lapse from the NWS office in Las Vegas, showing a what's called a microburst here. I'm going to just show the big screen here from 2018. So essentially, when a thunderstorm collapses and unloads all of its water and wind energy onto the ground, kind of like a vertically pointing fire hose. Just a really impressive event there that caused significant wind damage in the Las Vegas area. Lots of trees and fences and power lines down, power outages and things like that. So, the key thing with monsoon is it's coming from thunderstorm activity, whereas atmospheric rivers are more of a widespread kind of shield of rain and higher elevation snow. So the monsoon hazards do tend to be more focused, a little bit more localized. They also produce dust storms with the wind energy coming through, and then of course flash flooding. And these are just a couple of recent examples, including around Death Valley nearby, that it has seen several flood events now in the last few years, all from really intense monsoon precipitation events that produce rainfall amounts of 1 to 2 inches in just an hour. Now, the predictability of the monsoon is generally pretty decent. We can see that the general pattern coming many days in advance, but really in terms of for a specific point, it might only be a few hours of heads up that, ooh, okay, now you're definitely going to get this thunderstorm and this heavy rainfall and these hazards and things like that. So, whereas the atmospheric river events in the wintertime, just the predictability does tend to be a little bit better just because they are a bigger phenomena. In general, in meteorology, the bigger the thing you're looking at, the more predictable it is. So thunderstorms are some of the smaller things, and so they're a little bit less predictable. So monsoon rains can mean a lot. While they're scattered, they can still mean a lot. So here's an example of a poor monsoon showing in 2020. Look at that percent of normal precipitation there. Really, really meager amounts, less than 20% of normal for that July through September period in 2020. So here's how the drought monitor actually changed during that same period. We actually had a huge degradation in the drought monitor status across eastern and southern Nevada as a result of that lack of monsoon precipitation. So again, while winter is probably still the most important for our water supply and for drought, the showing or non-showing of a monsoon can kind of make or break a water year. So here's a year, this year, where the monsoon really showed up, especially across central and southern Nevada, but even out here in northwest Nevada, we had a decent monsoon, over 200% of normal in many spots. So here you can see during that same time period that at least across southern Nevada, the drought monitor actually improved 1 or 2 classifications as a result. So monsoon, while not the whole egg basket, it's a decent chunk of what it dictates what our drought situation will be. So I think for both hazards, for both atmospheric rivers and for drought and for the monsoon thunderstorms, it's important to know that Nevada does have some radar coverage gaps, and those are really important because it helps us whether or not we can monitor these events with a lot of detail. So what you're looking at here is a graphic showing you what we call low altitude radar coverage from our weather radars in Reno, Elko, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and Boise, along, of course, radars in California. And in general, these, the orange and purple colors are good, really solid radar data. But out here, especially along Highway 6 and then across far northwest Nevada, up toward the Sheldon Wildlife Refuge, the weather radars, the detail isn't quite as good just because they're further away from the radar site. So these are a challenge in monitoring these storms, especially the shallower wintertime precipitation events. So always keep that in mind. If you're looking at your app and you're like somewhere in the middle of Nevada and you're like, why isn't it showing anything? It's dumping snow out the window. That's why, is because the weather radar beam is essentially overshooting some of those shallower precipitation events. So to wrap up here, the bottom line, this kind of, if you had to take one slide from this presentation, this would be the one. What are the comparisons and contrasts of each? So for atmospheric rivers, these are a cool season phenomena, October through April primarily. It's a west to east directed plume of moisture off the Pacific Ocean, often connected to the tropics back to like Hawaii, or again, in some of the big flood events that can go even further west, almost to the Philippines. Widespread precipitation impacts from a broad shield of rain and snow. This is a significant contribution to the water supply and snowpack. Pretty predictable many days in advance. Of course, the specific impacts, we might have to still get to 1, 2, or 3 days closer to the event. And of course, there are hazards if we have too many of them or they're too strong: flooding, heavy snow, and extreme winds. And atmospheric rivers are a good contributor to all of Nevada, not just the northern part of Nevada, but even southern Nevada can still benefit from those cool season atmospheric rivers. Now, the monsoon is a warm season phenomena, June through September primarily. This is more of a south to north directed plume of moisture off the tropics, so different orientation. Also, the precipitation tends to be more scattered, and the impact's also a little bit more scattered because it's primarily from thunderstorms, not a broad shield of precipitation. The monsoon can help take the edge off a drought, as you saw. If the monsoon really shows up, it can help. But in terms of water supply, it's fairly limited benefit just because the precip tends to be more scattered. While Lake Mead might rise an inch or two because of a lot of thunderstorms, that's only an inch or two. It's not, in terms of the wintertime precip and snowpack provides way, way more water than that. The monsoon pattern can be predicted many days out, but specific impacts, because it's the nature of thunderstorms, really only 0 to 2 hours of lead time on that predictability. And the hazards, they're flooding, dust storms, intense winds, and of course, lightning. So that's kind of the comparison of atmospheric rivers and the monsoon. And I'll stop sharing my screen. So there you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. This is Lindsay Floyd, and we will get it started with panel 1. But thank you so much for that presentation. That was excellent. Do we have any questions in the chat before we start the next session?
I want to know where Chris Smallcomb's last trail run was. Where did you run last, Chris?
Yeah. You don't want to ask that question. So I'm actually recovering from running the Rio de Lago 100-mile on this last weekend. So I was over in Auburn, Olsen. It rained half of the race. I was out there 27 hours. So it's entertaining watching me get in and out of a car right now. But yeah, so that was it.
Awesome. Well, good morning and welcome everyone. I apologize, but after a few computer restarts this morning, I'm unable to turn on my video, but my name is Lindsay Floyd and I'm a water resource planner with the Army Corps of Engineers in the Sacramento district. And it was a pleasure working with the Nevada Silver Jackets team to organize this Watershed University event, and I'm so thrilled that you all can attend today. But I'm excited to welcome folks from across Nevada to explore the differences and similarities in floodplain management across northern and southern Nevada, and hear a little bit about what the future of floodplain management might look like. So we will kick it off for panel 1, and representing the state perspective, we are joined by Erin Warnock, the state floodplain manager. From northern Nevada, I'd like to welcome George Robison and Robb Fellows. And finally, representing Southern Nevada, we have Peter Jackson and Andrew Trelease. So this will be an interactive panel discussion session, and I encourage you all to type any questions you have during the panel into the chat box, and we'll ask them as they come up. But I'd like to start us off by learning a little bit more about our panelists. So Erin, could you kick us off and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role in floodplain management in Nevada?
Yes. Let's see. Can you guys see me? Oh, there I am.
There you are.
Hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Erin Warnock. I'm the state floodplain manager for Nevada and NFIP coordinator. I'm also the other state lead, so the other co-lead for Nevada Silver Jackets. My partner is Sarah, who presented earlier. Where I work out of the Division of Water Resources office. And as far as the state level, many of you guys have kind of heard the spiel, but just a reminder, kind of the pillars of our office is ultimately to be a liaison for FEMA and support for the communities. So we do this by offering trainings like we're doing today. We do community assistance visits, community assistance contacts, which are essentially audits, but they're meant to support the community and make sure that they have the knowledge and the resources that they need to be in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program. And we also participate in outreach to do this. We participate in mitigation. We work closely with partners like Silver Jackets, USACE, partners at Emergency Management. So this is kind of how we help oversee the whole state and the watersheds and floodplain management.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. Peter, will you go next and come off mute and introduce yourself? And you might be double muted, Peter, so it looks like you're muted on the WebEx.
Okay.
There we go. Now I can hear you. All right, for a second. How about while Peter troubleshoots, we can turn it over to Andrew. So do you mind coming off mute and introducing yourself?
Sure. First, I'd like to say I don't know whose decision it was to follow Chris Smallcomb for our panel. It was kind of sucks for us, but great job, Chris. As always, your stuff's amazing, and thank you for that. I'm Andrew Trelease. I'm the Assistant General Manager for the Regional Flood Control District in Clark County in Las Vegas, most famously. So we are generally a planning and funding organization, and we are responsible for the funding, the design, and construction and maintenance of the major flood control facilities in Southern Nevada, and also a plethora of outreach activities. And that's probably a good place to stop. I'll take up all our time.
Hopefully you can all hear me now. I'm Peter Jackson with the City of Las Vegas. I'm the city's floodplain manager and CRS coordinator. And we take all the money we can get from regional flood and help build facilities and structures to make our community safer. But the big thing is our goal in long term is to eliminate the flood zones and eliminate the properties that are in the flood zone so that our community is safer.
Thanks, Peter. And do you mind talking a little bit about how you and Andrew work together in floodplain management in Southern Nevada?
Yeah, the city, we work really closely with regional flood and actually the weather service to monitor our storm watches and warnings. We look at a lot of different data. We're fortunate that regional flood, we have order of magnitude around 200 rain gauges in the Las Vegas Valley area that give us fantastic real-time data so that we can track the information from these thunderstorms, however widespread or isolated they may be. And this allows us to work with regional to identify areas where we need to improve our storm drain systems and mitigation, as well as see how well the facilities are operating. And it also gives us a good idea of what type of maintenance work we need to be doing.
Great.
And that's
Thank you,
kind
Peter.
of the simple answer.
That's perfect. So next I'll turn it over to our Northern Nevada folks. So George, will you please come off mute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm George Robison. I am the Executive Director of the Truckee River Flood Management Authority. And like the southern counterpart down there, our focus is the Truckee River only. So we look at the Truckee River and the major tributaries that come in, backwater effects, etc. And our focus is not only emergency management, but mitigation. We have several plans for large mitigation projects. We actually are still an authorized U.S. Army Corps of Engineer project for the Truckee River, although we have been working separately over the last few years. But anyways, we are both mitigation and emergency management, and we, like our Vegas counterpart, we also have a active network of gauges to try to see what these storms are doing and be able to predict what, when, and where and how we're going to have a flood.
Great. And then last but not least, Rob, can you tell us a little bit about your work in floodplain management and also how you work with George in Northern Nevada?
Yes, my name is Robb Fellows. I'm the floodplain manager for Carson City. Been doing this since 2006, and we're actually separated from George. We do some things together, but not so much because we're in different watersheds. You know, our main flooding contributor is from the foothills, from the Carson Range, and then that goes to the Carson River. But we have also some gauges in the foothills that we work through the National Weather Service to alert us on pending floods and that kind of thing. But we're relatively small compared to those other watersheds, and that's good and bad in some ways, but that's kind of what Carson City is all about. We do plan for floods, and we try to mitigate as much of the floodplain hazards as we can. So that we've been doing a good job since the freeway was constructed through Carson City. Do you want me to go on just to my slides? I got 3 slides.
Sure, that would be great.
So just a little preview. I wanted to get more to the panel questions, but just a picture showing a basin on the west side of Carson City. It's a total retention basin, affects a third of the city, and it's been working for us ever since it was constructed in 2005. I wanted to highlight really what the Eagle Valley has as far as a flood hazard. That's pretty much the center of the city, and the blue area is the A zone, the special flood hazard areas in the city. And there's about 3,800 acres of that special flood hazard area. Back in the late 1990s, they approved a tax initiative to purchase open space. And when they did that, that allowed the city to actually purchase and own quite a bit of the special flood hazard area. So of that 3,800 acres, I guess my slides keep moving back and forth, but there's 71% of that special flood hazard in open space. And so that's just a highlight of something in Carson City that maybe people aren't aware of. And so that's really my little tiny preview of Carson City, and I was going to turn it over to whoever's next.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate that overview. So the first question that I have for you all is, how are floods currently managed in your area of responsibility, and how do you manage stage versus flow? So I will turn it over to Erin first to get us started.
That actually would be something I think that would need to be answered at the local level.
Great. So George, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, do you mind if I share my screen?
Go for it.
Because I think that would help a lot here.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and share this PowerPoint and ignore this current slide on here. When it comes up, I'll get off of that slide. But what I wanted to show you real quick is this right here. So does everybody, hold on.
Hold on one
Everybody see
second.
it
Yeah,
now?
George. There you go.
Okay. So what we have here is a flow chart, and it's really important for us. We have, like I said, a lot of gauging. We we have a cooperative agreement actually with the USGS. We have our own gauges, and we are actually doing a big review of our gauging network to better make sure that we're doing a good job of giving information and feeding information, especially to the Weather Service. But the first step is the Weather Service has key gauges, and the most key gauge of all for us is Vista, which is down in Sparks. But there are other key gauges, like for instance, we can see the flood forming in Truckee, we can see the flood forming in Farad, Mogul, we can see it on Steamboat Creek, we can see it on the North Truckee Drain. We have gauges for all of that. And we also have precipitation gauges, and some of the gauges we have can do snow pillows, and we can get an idea of how fast the snow is melting or what kind of a storm it is for temperature, because we have a lot of temperature gauges. So that's the big thing is National Weather Service has tools and a model, and they can predict our flow rate. In the past, this model has been a deterministic model, and it's a one-line model, and we go, okay, well, that's what's going to happen. Now there's probabilistic elements. Now we understand how variable it is, how good their prediction is, how widespread, is there a lot of uncertainty on the high end, things like that. So we're going to have to be more nuanced in the future when we get to what's called the flood threat group. The flood threat group has no designated members to it, although the Regional Emergency Operations Center for Washoe County calls it. And for a big flood like a Truckee River flood, I would be involved with it. Obviously, the National Weather Service would be involved, and some of our floodplain managers from the cities of Reno and Sparks, as well as Washoe County, as well as the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe would all be involved in that decision. And once we determine the flood potential, we decide whether we're going to have an alert or what we're going to do here. And it's really based on stage, and in this case, the stage at Vista Narrows is the key issue. So we're looking ahead to see what's going to happen at Vista Narrows for determining a flood that's caused, as Chris was talking about, it's probably an AR causing this flood. It could be a rain on snow event. Typically, that's what's involved here is a big AR, rain on snow, probably antecedent soil conditions that are wet, and just a really bad situation that makes the flooding threat great. And so if you look at this gauge, we have in our plan, we have a very detailed plan that needs to be updated, but we can see all these different stages and what they mean. And you said stage versus flow. Really, we have a nice curve where we relate stage to flow and flow to stage, but we are looking at the stage first for this sort of a thing. So if we see that deterministic line getting up in this, 17 feet, we're going to convene the emergency operations center. We're going to get it going. We're going to send out warnings. We're going to talk to people about sandbags. We're going to start talking about our first responders, about how much time they have, things of that nature. But the thing is, when we do the regional operations center, it's all hands on deck. All the cities are involved, the counties involved, the tribes are involved, Story County's involved. We have a large consortium of people that work together on this. And the feds, because we have upstream dams, unlike the Carson River with Robb, he has that one detention dam. We actually have reservoirs that are federally managed that can be managed to keep the flows lower, including a dam at Lake Tahoe that's really not managed for flooding, but then flooding dams at Stampede, Boca, and so on. So we really have a large group of people that we rely on to make a decision how dangerous this flood is going to be. Then once the flood comes in, it's all hands on deck. We have fire departments. We coordinate with the police, everybody for evacuations, for evacuation centers. It just gets bigger and bigger as the emergency unfolds. I have never been involved with one up here in Nevada. I have been involved with one in Oregon at the statewide level, a gigantic flood back in 1996. But basically, we have a plan. We've tested on our plan. We've done our drills and stuff like that, and we're hopeful that when a flood comes, we'll be ready for it. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I've got.
That's great. Yeah. Rob, do you want to add anything from the northern perspective?
Yeah, we're a lot similar, except, for Carson City, we're a consolidated municipality. So we're a city county together. And so we've kind of got to do things essentially on our own. But we, in a smaller type situation, we're very similar. We at Public Works monitor the weather. We know when things are going to happen, and with the help of the National Weather Service, we deploy different sandbags, and we check all the systems, make sure everything's clear. And so when it starts to rain and starts to flood, we have Public Works out in the city, making sure the system can take as much as it can. And then we work with the sheriff's office on all those things that George had talked about. It's a relatively short distance from the west to the east, and flooding along the Carson River isn't as bad in the sense that it doesn't affect a large part of the city. And so it's mainly from the foothills to the Carson River. There is concerns about the river flooding, but it's not like downtown Carson City.
Got it. Thank you so much for setting the scene for how stage versus flow is managed in northern Nevada. But I'd like to welcome Peter or Andrew to talk a little bit about how floods are currently managed in southern Nevada and how you manage stage versus flow.
I'll start off, Peter. I can do my part really quick. In southern Nevada, in the Regional Flood Control District, we're really focused on mitigation. I mean, that's our main focus because, as Chris mentioned earlier, our storms, our bad storms, we don't know where they're going to happen until they just basically starts falling in the summertime usually. So we have over almost 700 miles of storm drains and channels, 104 detention basins around Clark County, and we keep the other part of our mitigation is making sure that all of our facilities are maintained properly. That the public, we ask the public, if you see a clogged storm drain or debris in a channel, let us know. We'll call the Public Works agency that's responsible, go out and get that maintained, make sure everything's ready to go. And then when it actually does start raining, we're just, crossing our fingers and hoping for the best and hope those facilities are functioning the way they're designed. And then as Rob said, we send out our, we don't have public works crews, but we coordinate with all the public works crews as we go. And when there's an actual storm, we're very reactive. We're like, where is it raining? What are the problems? Is it wind? Is it rain? How much rain? Are our facilities working properly? And hopefully they are. And usually we're pretty lucky that we have a great system. All of our flood control facilities are designed for a 100-year storm. So they do work pretty well unless there's debris in the system. And so most of the problems we have are just nuisance problems with people driving down the road and installing out in high water in the streets and stuff like that. But mostly I'd say we're focused on mitigation more than actual reacting during the event.
Right. So Peter, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say is we really look at the mitigation side, but as far as stage versus flow, we don't really look at it as stage because all of our facilities are pretty much designed for the 100-year event and have additional freeboard built into the design as well. So, but with our gauges, we can monitor not only the rainfall, but we also monitor the flow and the flow depth in those facilities. And this really helps us with our O&M crews to know where they need to look at problem areas. And especially where we haven't built our regional facilities yet, we can deploy city resources to those areas during and after the storm for cleanup in the neighborhoods as well as streets and public facilities. But like Andrew said, we really our goal is to mitigate the flows and to protect the properties. And like I said in the chat, we always countywide, not only just the city of Las Vegas, but Henderson, North Las Vegas, Clark County, Boulder City, Mesquite, we all talk about it doesn't really matter where you live. We keep reminding everybody that flood insurance is always available. And actually, my few repetitive loss properties that I have, only one of them is in the flood zone. The rest are in outlying areas. So it's always important to help understand where your risk is so that your facilities can capture and protect it, as well as working with the public works crews to make sure the inlets aren't clogged, the detention basins and debris basins are regularly cleaned and monitored to make sure they function as designed. Does that answer your question on that?
That's great. Thank you so much for providing that context. And I see, Debbie, you have your hand up. If you want to come off mute and ask a question, please do so.
Hi, Lindsay. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Great. I am really curious, Andrew and Peter, what kind of planning documents that you have and how that relates to the design standards of developments and whatnot. And is that all worked in to that? And then you said you do mitigation projects, and Peter and Andrew both said that you get your funding from the 1/4% of 1% sales tax. So do you have like an inventory list of, okay, we need to do these, like how do you determine which flood control projects you're going to do next? So yeah, the one question about the documents that you use and also the codes or incentives that you use to get development to put those standards in, and are they to a 25-year standard or are they so if you could just talk a little bit about that, I'd be curious to hear about it.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time, but I think I can hit on those topics. We have a flood control master plan for Clark County. We actually have 5 of them, but by law, by NRS, we have to update those at least every 5 years. And we're actually, because it's modern times and And that law was created in the 80s when it was mostly paper documents. Everything now is GIS. So our master plan is really very fluid. We pretty much each day it changes with our construction of a new facility. But we with that plan, we basically show all of our existing facilities. And as I mentioned, we have like 667 miles of existing storm drains and channels and 104 detention basins, which is, that's what's in place. Those are all designed to the 1% chance storm. And so those mostly protect existing developments. And then as the, development occurs, which is very rapidly, we plan new facilities, and the planning side of that, of where we build the next facility, really occurs on the 10-year plan. So we have a 10-year plan for construction. That starts our design of each of our projects, and then we fund that once the design's done, and we prioritize those based on a list of about 10 factors, most of them being life and safety and opportunity for other funding sources and things like that. And so then each entity, so Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, Henderson, for example, each has a piece of our funding revenue. Our revenue last fiscal year was $144 million. And so, some of that is obligations for previous debt services and things like that. But we end up with like $40 to $60 million a year for new projects. And so each of those entities will prioritize projects based on the most important project they feel like in their jurisdiction, and we work with them with that. And then we kick off the project, get the construction started. And then the Regional Flood Control District also funds the maintenance of all of those facilities once they're constructed. We don't own or operate anything. Peter's group, like for the city of Las Vegas, would own and operate. Their public works crews would actually do the physical maintenance of it, but they would bill us for the maintenance of those. So it's a very reliable system, and it works very well. Hopefully that answers most of the questions. Peter, you can jump in and more
Thank
from
you.
a Las Vegas perspective.
And from the city of Las Vegas perspective, we spend about $3.2 million a year just on major maintenance alone. And we have a few really large major projects going. Probably the largest is our Charleston system, which is downtown, old historic downtown Las Vegas. Right now we have a project that's about 60 million in construction. Of that, I want to say 45 to 48 million is regional flood control share. So we are spending a lot of money building these things. And like I said, it's funded off our quarter-cent sales tax. And as Andrew said, this last year was 144 million. So all the entities get a percentage share of that, and it's based on Watershed. So right now, I think the city is one of the larger percentages of that pie right now. And our 10-year plan, I think, currently has about $200+ million in lined out projects that will be taken care of. And depending on the costs and how the bids come in, as Andrew said, the 10-year plan is fluid all the time based on current bids and priorities, and the priorities change based on events as well. I hope that answers enough of the information for you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew and Peter, and thanks, Debbie, for the great question.
That's really great. Thank you. So it doesn't sound like, it sounds like the way you build these things is through the actual quarter of 1% sales tax. And so that there are not any construction requirements when a new development is built. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
All development within Clark County area, not just the city, has to design their projects for the 10 and 100-year events. And they look at both interim and ultimate development conditions. The master plan is based on an ultimate development boundary and ultimate improvements. And We have developers at times, depending on what they're doing, where they will be building the identified regional facilities to provide protection for their communities. A good example is Summerlin area of Las Vegas on the west side. Summerlin spends a lot of money building their infrastructure for their development parcels, and that includes those 100-year facilities. Summerlin just completed a rehab on one large detention basin, and they just constructed another one on their site, and then they're building all the 100-year facility infrastructure that goes with it. So all development has to identify what the impacts are and protect themselves from the highest flow for that 100-year event.
And the last thing of that is when the developers fund those themselves, they're usually major facilities that are maintained by, for example, City of Las Vegas, but they're on our regional master plan still. So we will still provide the funding for the maintenance, even if a developer builds it, as long as it's on our plan.
Thanks for adding that, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you both. And Debbie, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to throw those in the chat, and maybe Andrew and Peter can respond in the chat. But I want to make sure that we hear more from Northern Nevada. So George and Rob, I would like to learn more about how did the two of you communicate and work together during a flood event?
Actually, we don't really, because usually I'm focused on the Truckee and Robb will be focused on the Carson. We usually get hit at the same time, so we're both scampering with our own resources, trying to, get sandbags, flood fight, get people together in an actual flood. But I want to pivot and talk a little bit about mitigation because we are funded by a 1/8 cent sales tax ourselves with Washoe County, and we have an extensive mitigation program that we really haven't even talked about yet. It's about a $12 million a year budget, and that's what we're working with the Corps with, and we are trying to create a more robust system where we don't flood out our airport. Like when we flood out our airport. Can you imagine Las Vegas airport being flooded out? Reno airport gets flooded out in a major flood. We lose our Sparks industrial area. We lose a Reno industrial area. We have extensive damages that are estimated at around $3 billion if we had another 1997 flood here. So it's a major issue for us to fix this issue and this problem, but do it in an environmental way. So anyways, wow. I just want to pivot on that. And you do have questions about doing this in a natural restorative way, and we are trying to do that with floodplain restoration to increase conveyance in certain areas, also increase storage in certain areas by working with a floodplain and recreating a floodplain that is more natural, because we have had some channelization in the past. So I just wanted to say that before we got off this thing, that the major thing that we work on is that project. That is what we have put away tens of millions of dollars for that project. It's a $200 million project that we want to get done in the next 10 years. So it's a big project, and there's flood fighting, but we want to mitigate the flood so it's not so serious.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would like to pivot and kind of open that conversation up to all of our panelists of could natural and nature-based features be a viable option for flood risk management in your region? And are there any examples of solutions that have been successfully implemented thus far? So maybe Rob, if you want to kick us off on that.
I certainly would. Carson City has really done an exceptional job. I mean, those two slides that I brought up with, 71% of the special flood hazard being in open space. I mean, we're a big proponent of, leaving the natural areas open for the floodplain to use, and have been successful in doing so. And we're looking to even get more of that in the future. So starting the program and having the funding and being able to, lay out the groundwork back in the mid 1990s has really made a big difference. I mean, we obviously don't have as big a budget to mitigate. We're always looking to mitigate some of the flood sources, and we're looking to do basins, which is going to help greatly. But it's all a matter of the area that we have to work with, and so the natural means to allow the floodplains to be in their or the floods to be in their floodplains is what's happening in Carson City. So.
Great. And are there any examples in Southern Nevada that you would like to highlight, either Peter or Andrew, of places where natural and nature-based features could be used or are currently being implemented? Peter, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, unfortunately, given the slopes and the soil conditions in Southern Nevada, we don't do a lot of nature-based solutions. We do have the Clark County Wetlands Park downstream of our major sanitation facilities that have built weirs and wetlands park area to help improve water quality. The reality of it is most of our mitigation with development is hard facilities, because where we have more natural washes in the steeper slopes, we end up with a lot of erosion and sediment and problems, which kind of defeat the purpose of that nature-based solutions. So we don't do a lot of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, understandable. Andrew, anything to add? Is it similar where your area of responsibility is?
Yeah, Peter pretty much mentioned it. I mean, the Wetlands Park, I don't think he mentioned, was on Las Vegas Wash, which is our largest wash in town. So it is a flood control facility as well. So that is a success of a nature-based type solution. There's a lot of weirs that are there, and it's a great area. So great to visit. But we, like, as far as we have a lot of grass line channels that were built through golf courses and parks. But now with the drought in Southern Nevada, the Southern Nevada Water Authority won't even allow grass because of the legislation that just came out. That's considered non-functional turf. So we were not even allowing grass line channels anymore. So we always look at opportunities for it as part of every design. But when it really comes down to it, the concrete facilities, and really we're better off doing a concrete facility and then doing some landscaping and things around it and building trails and things around it, rather than doing the actual facility itself as nature-based. So that's kind of our approach here.
Yeah. At least from the Corps side, I work for the Corps of Engineers. There has been a lot of focus in the last few years on engineering with nature and natural and nature-based features. So Erin, I'm kind of curious from the state's perspective, how have you seen floodplain management change over your career, and where do you see floodplain management practices going in the future?
No, I can't really speak to kind of how I've gotten to see it over my career, because really my career has kind of just begun. But what I can see is, especially during our talks in our mitigation workshops, nature-based solutions are something that is becoming more prevalent in requirements for applying for grants. To receive more money, you get more points essentially if you're incorporating engineering with nature and nature-based solutions. So I definitely see a push from the federal side of things, from who's giving us this funding to do these mitigation projects, pushing for that. So I think we can anticipate that over time we're going to see requirement for incorporating this, and projects will begin to incorporate it more so than we have in the past. But there are obviously challenges with that, as Las Vegas area, Clark County mentioned. So I think we're just going to have to get creative with, like what Andrew said, doing concrete and incorporating trails. So I think there's going to be a lot of learning to come, because while asking for that, it's not going to look the same from areas and climates that are applying. So That's what I would add to that.
Definitely. And I'd like to open that question up to all of our panelists. How have you seen floodplain management practices change over your career, and where do you see them going in the future?
No, well, I can speak to that since I'm kind of old. But you know, when my career started, I actually got interested in watersheds and hydrology and things like that, actually fishing the Truckee River as a teenager. And then I moved to another state and got a master's and PhD in that field, and I was a big player in that state. That was Oregon. And when I was first starting, there was a real focus on conveyance and making sure you have good conveyance and, you know, keep that roughness down so the water can flow through there really fast and things of that nature. And what we've been seeing lately is, at least for perennial rivers, I'm not talking about Las Vegas here where you have ephemeral streams, but where you have a perennial river like the Truckee River or the Carson River, etc. What we're trying to do is get the river back into a more natural floodplain, let it have more interaction, let it have infiltration back into the near river aquifers, so that the aquifers can actually input to the river during the dry season, provide thermal refugia, water refugia for fish during low flows. I mean, all that is come about in the last 30 years. And I remember one of my projects, and it was in Idaho, but I was working with a company, and they literally took a culvert that was completely buried, completely unburied the culvert. This was in Moscow, Idaho, and made it into a natural style creek right through the middle of town. And that was a federally funded project. It was a core project back in the 2010 timeframe, 2009. And so you start seeing more of that, where people are trying to get these rivers back to a more natural state, working with the floodplains, more natural vegetation, trying to bring the riparian dependent wildlife back, trying to create structure for fish species if it's a perennial river like the Truckee. This has all been a trend, and we here at TRFMA, we really want to engage in that. We've given money to the Nature Conservancy to do a bunch of work on the lower river, where we are doing just that with floodplain restoration. And we're using the lessons that were learned down there for some of our projects that we're planning now that are more conveyance oriented. But you can do both at the same time if you have some room. That's the problem. A lot of times you don't have the room to be able to do this. But like Robb said, he has a lot of room. They bought a lot of land, so they got a lot of room. We have some room, and so Vegas has maybe no room, and so that's the difference right there. And with the room we have, we want to really optimize both the natural and the conveyance features of anything that we do, so that we're doing both at the same time.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. Peter or Andrew, anything you'd like to add from the Southern Nevada perspective about how floodplain management has changed over your careers and where you see it going in the future?
I can start. I think a big, and I mentioned it several times, I think mitigation is the big change since my career started. The cycle of disaster response, recovery, rebuild, and do it all again is just not a sustainable model. So I think that we realize that even if it's whether it's constructing infrastructure or educating the public on not just staying away from those areas when it floods, but building proper elevation on your residence and things like that, that is a big change. That really is the more sustainable model to make sure that when it does, when we do get these big events, that the communities are resilient. And the technology that occurs now is like not just for modeling and knowing what the risks are and how they're going to affect your buildings or your population, but just the communication, the way we can communicate with the public now. It's like, before we used to put ads in the phone book, to like, hey, we should buy flood insurance, but how effective is that? Certainly it's not effective now. There's no phone books anymore. but we can do social media. We can do, you know, public access. We can create our own shows, our own videos, and post those, and we can geofence those to say like, okay, well, before you get a flood warning and it's like, oh, it's in Mesquite. You're like, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that. And so now we can say like, well, we're not going to warn you when there's really no risk to where you are. So we're just going to say like, okay, Henderson, it's raining where you are. Be careful. And we're just going to let those people know on social media that they're raining. So it's not a boy who cried wolf situation where people are just ignoring your messages anymore. So if you get a message, it means that yes, there is real danger. So I think that's the big changes that I've seen in floodplain management. You know, it's not just from the engineering side, it's from the, you know, the public outreach side as well. And I just see that continuing. And I think that the success of our programs will continue to grow as we share this information and we do things like this and keep people informed in the public and really as I think Peter mentioned before, like, you know, the educated, you know, the elected officials as well, that they understand and they do understand the importance of our infrastructure as well, and they continue to support the programs.
And just to add quickly to what Andrew said, for me, the biggest change has been the support from our community officials. And the Regional Flood Control Board is made up of elected officials from all of the communities. So they have a lot of impact on what happens. And like I said earlier, our goal is to remove the homes from the flood zone that are in it. Or
special flood hazard areas, Peter.
Yes, I'm sorry, special flood hazard area. But we also have a higher regulatory standard. All new construction in the special flood hazard area has to be a minimum of 18 inches above that water surface elevation. And that's been a standard here in Southern Nevada for a long time. Just recently, we changed our ordinance also to modify it to cover the mechanical, electrical equipment as well, to make sure that is at least 18 inches above as well. So it's the community following our master plan and identifying where we can reduce that risk.
So I would concur with Andrew as far as the outreach, making people more aware of what flooding is and getting used to some of the terms and understanding. You know, here in Carson City, we really want them to know how to look at the map, understand what it is they're looking at. So definitely the outreach I've seen over the years be increased, and I think it's making a difference here in Carson City.
Awesome. Well, we received a few audience questions that I will ask. So one is, do the floodplain managers have a real-time flood model with input from the several rain gauges and stream gauges, or are the gauges used to understand the characteristics of a storm and the respective watersheds?
Let me start with Carson City real quick. We do not have a model for the city proper, but there is a model that's developed for the Carson River, and that's newly created and is going to be used in the future. So that's what we've got going here.
The Truckee River, the National Weather Service has a hydrology model that they feed their climate data into to get what kind of hydrology is inputting. We actually have a model now that we can run it. It's a very complicated two-dimensional model, but we can get it to run in a special form where it takes about 3 hours to run, so we can update it in between forecasts. And so we can look at what neighborhoods might be getting impacted and how they're getting impacted, like what kind of depths are they going to experience, what kind of velocities are they going to experience, so that we can help first responders in a flood, like, hey, this area is probably going to get hit in 2 hours. You've got to get out of there. Or, you know, if you're going to go there, you better get a boat. You know, it's going to be 7 feet deep and your trucks are not going to work there. That kind of thing we're able to do with a model. We also are working on a new FEMA update, as I saw Eric Simmons on the chat asking the question. Yeah, we're all in different flood zones. And but the point is we want to have our flood zones accurate and updated, and so we're working on that with this model as well. So yeah, we do have the model, and it's just coming online really, and it's accurate enough and terrain based enough to where we feel comfortable using it. Whereas in the past, some of the models might not have been realistic enough.
Great. Yeah, so the second question we received in the chat are, do any of your communities receive CRS Activity 610 early warning credit? And this is for the FEMA community rating system where points are given for certain flood risk management activities. So as far as any of you know, is your community receiving that 610 early warning credit?
We're not. I think they had some requisites that needed to come first before you could get that credit, but we didn't obviously get those this time for Carson City.
Same with the city of Las Vegas. We're under a CRS review right now, and right now we don't meet all the prerequisites in 610, so we're not getting 610 credit. But we do some of the items. We just don't do everything right now. So you have to meet the major 4 requirements to get any points in that. So I think the only community right now that gets any credit in Southern Nevada is Henderson is getting some, but that's still under review by CRS right now.
Understood. And that's a great plug for tuning in tomorrow, where we'll have a couple sessions on Risk Rating 2.0 and the CRS overview. So we are going to launch the knowledge check. Danae is going to start a poll, and if you are looking to receive continuing education credits, make sure that you fill out those questions. But while that is running, I would like to thank you all so much for being on this panel today and open it up for any last remarks. Maybe Erin, you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So just based on what everyone was talking about, what they've noticed has changed in floodplain management, for me, it's exciting to hear. And I think we can all agree that as far as the best practices of floodplain management, the science of floodplain management is really all improving for the better. The restoration of natural floodplains, ultimately that's going to be best for the environment, like George was talking about. Practices of mitigation, we're definitely trying to push for that as well, just on the state side of things. Get more people in our state interested in mitigation, also because there's funding for it too. But like Andrew said, it's not a sustainable model to flood and rebuild, and instead to prepare before something happens. So I think we can all agree, yeah, that floodplain management is moving in a really good direction. And hopefully the insurance side of things will start to line up with that as we kind of have this new risk rating 2.0 model that's living, breathing, in progress. So that's what I hope to see. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Those were my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thanks for joining us on the panel today. Anyone else want to start with some closing remarks before we wrap up the panel discussion today?
Just a couple things with Carson City. I see continuing of mitigation in Carson City, and we've got some large basins for Carson City standard to be installed, which will further protect the city. And I see things always improving. We're always looking at ways to mitigate flood hazards just as they do in Las Vegas.
Great. And George, anything to add from the Northern Nevada perspective?
Yeah, our real focus has been on mitigation, and we're not only doing home elevation projects, which have been we've been having some of our people talk about with different groups lately, which are really important. But we're also very involved in creating mitigation projects we want to really seal off our airport, and we really want to keep floodwaters out of industrial areas because of not only because of the how they would destroy an industrial area and all the contents in certain warehouses and factories, but also that polluted water goes down to a terminal lake, and we really don't want that for Pyramid Lake since it cannot dilute like an ocean can. So that's really our focus. We really want to create that problem or create that solution to the problem where we don't have, periodic floods. We've had 4 floods in the last 50 years that have actually really got into the industrial area and put pollutants in. And we've had 2 that have closed, have partially closed down the airport in just the last 50 years. So it's a serious problem. We want to really nail that problem. That's our focus.
Thank you so much. And Erin typed in the chat, great goals, George. Andrew or Peter, anything you'd like to say for closing remarks? Anything I missed in the questions that you'd like to highlight?
Nothing I'd like to add. Just great to be on this panel and learn about what's going on in Northern Nevada, and happy to continue those partnerships where we can in the future. And yeah, that's it. Peter, what do you got?
I was just echoing on it. It's good to bring these discussions out and see what works where. The other part of it is the Watershed University is a great training tool for communities, and we need to continue and expand our training to help especially the smaller community floodplain managers in the state.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being on this panel and your insights into floodplain management now and where it's going. So thank you all so much. And if folks have any questions, you can type them in the chat and we can get to them later. But I will turn it over to Hunter to get us started on some breakout sessions. So over to you, Hunter.
Hey, thank you. And I found my picture of at least my latest favorite water body in Nevada, and put it up on my background. So I'm going to invite you all to do the same with your favorite water body of water or watershed or what you put in this morning. So by tomorrow, there you see Debbie's already on it. She's got this going on in her background. So I'm inviting you all to consider doing that. We'll see if there's a big reveal tomorrow morning. We'll see if people turn on their videos and they can show us their backgrounds. In the meantime, we're going to do some breakouts if you haven't done this before.
Okay, awesome. So we should all be back in the main space. Hope you all had a nice time networking, maybe met someone new, had some good conversation. We had a few questions. We tried to broadcast over there. Sorry for the late go on that. But we did want to spend just a couple minutes here before we take a break looking at this last question altogether. So what's a workshop or training idea that you'd like to see in the future? So just thinking back to kind of some of the silver jackets possibilities as far as webinars and workshops, different training to support floodplain managers. If there were any ideas that came up in your breakout sessions or any other ideas that you have, and if you'd like to share those, if you want to place that in the chat or come off of mute, we would love to hear from you. Awesome. See some things coming through in the chat. Excellent. Substantial damage, substantial improvement, SDSI. Stream bank stabilization, great. Hunter says he'd like to see Danielle present on the Gauge network and Larry talk about flash flooding lessons learned. That came out of group 7, excellent. Debbie says it would be great to have workshops to pass BCA, and that she'd love Southern Nevada to give their insights. Excellent. Okay, great. If anyone wants to come off mute, or if there are additional ideas, feel free to add those to the chat. We're going to be saving the chat after we wrap up for today later on, and we'll be looking back as we're brainstorming for additional Silver Jackets ideas. So your thoughts will be considered. So yeah, please add anything that you would like to see as a future workshop or training. And if there's a specific format for the topic that you think would be more effective, feel free to add that as well. For example, if it should be a webinar versus something more interactive like a workshop. Okay. Would anyone like to come off mute and talk about maybe what they discussed in their breakout session, or anything else before we go to break? All right.
I'll go real quick, Danae. We were in a breakout group. I was with Kaylin from Mono County, California Public Works, and Linda Potter from Star 2, who's going to be, or Atkins, who's going to be presenting next. But we got to talking a little bit about remapping. And I know that's something in Nevada anyway that we kind of rely on our communities during communication with them to let us know if they're interested in remapping, and us reaching out to FEMA to get that process going. It is a long process, can take up to 5 years to get those new maps done and live. But I think it would be good maybe to do a training, or just have a presenter at some point from FEMA Star 2 talk about the process of remapping, and give an example of how you might see improvement. Maybe an AO zone turns into an AE zone, which is easier to work with once it's been studied. And sometimes the outcome isn't always exactly what you want it to be either, but just examples as to why this makes sense, and ultimately why remapping is a good thing, because we have a lot of hesitation oftentimes in Nevada just because the process isn't always understood. So I think that would be good to bring information about that in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Erin. And it looks like Hunter put a question in the chat. What about agricultural ranch management practices? So if we would like to keep the chat going there, feel free to do that. We're going to go ahead and transition thank you, Lindsay, to our break. So for 10 minutes, feel free to step away and recharge, get a drink, do what you got to do, and we will reconvene here at 11:15. Thank you so much.
about my baby and my happy home. Every tree so late, heaven's going to break. Every tree so late, heaven's going to break. And all these people have no place to stay. I'm looking at mama, what am I to do? I'm looking at mama, what am I to do? I ain't got nobody in my trouble. I work on the life, I'm both night and day. I work on the life, I'm both night and day. I ain't got nobody, keep the water away. All kind of rain will do no good. I'm trying, rain will do no good. But I love grace, all you got to do. I work on the life, I'm both night and day. I work on the life, I'm both night and day. The work so hard, keep the water away. I want you would do for me. I want you would do for me. I'm going back to my youth to be. All me no left, all the weeds and mold. For me no left, all the weeds and mold. Gonna leave my baby and my happy home.
Right. Hey, Carlos, thanks for being our DJ. That was fun. I didn't know there was an original that was before Led Zeppelin. So now I got to go back and do some research. That's awesome. Um, looks like we have a video popping up. And I think that means that there's a cue for us to have our next presentation. And I saw a thumbs up from Danae, so I think I'm on target. Danae, do you want to give us some opening remarks on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome back everyone from break. We are going into our second panel for today, the second and last. It's going to be on arid regions, flood after fire. And we'll have Miss Linda Potter with us today from Atkins and David Cavagnaro from UNR. Excited to hear from them, and I think Lindsay is sharing a video to kind of get us kicked off on that panel. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks. I'm actually going to turn it over to Linda.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Love to talk about flooding after fire. So the first thing that we're going to show you is a video, and this is an example of an event. And while you're watching this, I'd like you to think about what you notice, and then I'm going to ask that question when we're done with the video. Debbie's asking where this video is from. This is from someplace in Arizona. Okay, so just type in the chat here real quick. What did you notice about this video? One of the comments was coffee grounds were stuck in the disposal and came pouring out. That's an excellent observation. It was kind of that really dark color that you might not expect, except for the fact that there was a fire upstream of this. The culvert held up, yes. One of the things that we didn't see in this example was that there wasn't a lot of debris in this one, and that's because it's the burn was actually farther up. Jeannie says that it was very loud. That's an excellent observation. There was definitely a lot of velocity in that water. One of the other observations I'd note is that it wasn't raining. The sun was actually out when they took that video. So that's interesting when you're looking at a post-burn situation. It doesn't necessarily have to rain. And how did the videographer know what was coming? This was due to gauges up in the watershed, so they knew it was on its way. All right. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide and then one right after that. So I think a lot of us understand the concept that when a fire happens, it does change the amount of runoff that's going to happen. So there is a fundamental change in the hydrology of burnt watersheds. We see this a lot more in the short term, which is approximately 1 to 5 years, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it does result in peak flow increases, faster arrival times of the runoff, more frequent runoff, and it can be orders of magnitude greater than pre-fire conditions. We'll go to the next slide. So this is just a picture of a burn area. This is also in northern Arizona, and you can pretty much tell that there's nothing left as far as vegetation is concerned on these slopes. So everything has been burnt off. We'll go to the next slide. So there are some underlying processes that cause the increase in runoff. So if you look at what goes into our hydrology models, we're often talking about rainfall and how much of that rainfall is turned into runoff, how much of that might soak into the ground, how fast it might be routed, and the other items in the watershed such as vegetation or increased erosion. So what we are expecting here is that our rainfall is likely not going to change. You know, rainfall always changes depending on the storm, but in the post-burn situation, there really isn't a change that's happening. So our initial abstraction, which is defined as the amount of rainfall that normally kind of soaks into the ground or is held up, is now reduced because of the burn. Also, our infiltration of that water is often reduced. Our routing is often faster. We've lost a lot of vegetation, and that can also lead to more erosion. We'll go to the next slide. So the initial abstraction, what are the mechanisms behind this? So raindrop impact leads to soil erosion. So there's a picture of that on the slide. There's also some surface depression storage. There might be vegetation litter, debris. There might be other things that are happening in this portion of initial abstraction. So we'll have less initial abstraction with more runoff and quicker timing. We'll go to the next slide. There you go. Vegetation. So vegetation often intercepts this rainfall, and because it's intercepting it, we'll have less raindrop impact. So the vegetation also deposits these leaves and stems and other items that kind of slow the water down. It can absorb moisture. It provides evapotranspiration back into the atmosphere, and our roots are supporting the soil. So if we have a fire, we might have less vegetation, and if that happens, we might have more runoff, quicker timing, more volume of flow, more erosion, and an increased debris flow and landslide potential. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in infiltration, where we have water soaking into the ground, we often use soil studies that characterize the soil's infiltration potential. And the soil scorching can change this rate, particularly in high intensity burn. And the fire can also create hydrophobes, and this is actually done by a chemical change in the soil property itself. So the result of our fire is that we're going to have less infiltration with more runoff and more volume. Routing. So routing, generally our shape and path remains the same in the pre-burn and post-burn. The thing that changes a lot is the roughness from the loss of vegetation, and also we're going to see some of these higher velocities. So the quicker timing can actually cause your hydrographs to kind of stack up on each other and arrive at the same time, which increases your flow. Erosion, increased erosion from this loss of vegetation. We also might have sediment bulking that gets entrained into the flows. We might have mud flows versus debris flows where we have, you know, kind of this muddy water or this increased bulked water, and our water quality is also going to suffer. So our burn results are higher water surface elevations. Thanks, we'll go to the next one. So here's a picture of the same location approximately in the pre-burn and post-burn condition. So you'll notice we have grasses, trees. In the post-burn condition now, suddenly we're left with this kind of scorched soil and not very much vegetation. Here's another picture. This is one of a less significant burn, so not quite as high intensity. When we have the pre-burn condition, you know, it's a nice fall day, so we've got, you know, some leaves on the ground and some trees. And then in the post-burn situation, you know, we can still kind of make out these trees, but we suddenly can see more of the wash banks that are exposed and some less vegetation to intercept. So we mentioned that burn severity might have an impact on how good or bad the response is from the storm. So one of the things that happens that's often made, and this is done typically by the Forest Service if you're in like a public land situation, where you get a burned area reflectance classification map. And this is where they use remote sensing of satellites to determine kind of the post-fire vegetation condition. And it also picks up some of the heat signatures of the fire. So these are used by BEAR teams. So BEAR is a burned area emergency response team. And these are kind of the U.S. Forest Service types of teams that get these maps out there. And what they'll do is they'll use the satellites at the beginning, and then they'll also actually go out there and check it out. So knowing what your burn severity is very good for determining out how your flow is going to change. So there's a couple ways that you can do this. So if you're not on federal land and you don't have the BEAR team, maybe you're going to go out there and try to evaluate the soil burn severity yourself. There is a link on this slide to the manual. Obviously today we're not going to go into it in any detail, but there is a manual out there so where you can go and actually measure, you know, how much gray ash do you have and where do you see roots and what your soil looks like. So when we start talking about the burn severity definition as it's described in the manual, a high burn severity is considered to have fully consumed vegetation, presence of gray ash, degraded, powdery, and loose type of ash soils. And because of this, we have high hydrophobicity that's down to 1/4 inch and moderate down to 1 inch. One of the things you'll notice on the picture right there is you'll see a nice big granite boulder that's actually had pieces of it spalled off the top from the high heat and water that was trapped in there. So that's another indication that we had a really high burn in this particular area. So for a moderate, we'll go back real quick. For a moderate burn severity, we'll have a nearly complete vegetation burn, minimal alteration of soil structure, and the hydrophobicity is only down to about 1/8 of an inch. And then so low burn severity and unburned to very low. The low burn severity might still be able to see, like there's a light char, but we can tell what was there before. We know the forms of the surface materials, you know, you can tell, was this a tree, was this a root? There might be some ash, but root masses are still intact. And so very low burn is very light char only. So that's just a quick summary of what happens during the fire. And there are several ways to come up with post-burn flow estimates. So we're going to talk about the methods and how to apply kind of a quick and easy version called a fire factor. And also we're going to talk about how to verify if we think our results are reasonable. So the first method is the peak flow factor method. I know in the fire situation, a lot of times this is an emergency and you just don't have a lot of time to, you know, gather around models. So, you know, you've got your emergency manager in there saying, hey, I need to know what roads to close. I need to know what people to evacuate. So one of the things that you can do is if you have a study or a flow estimate, you can apply just a factor to that. So it's a simple factor. If your pre-burn, the example at the very bottom, if your pre-event was 2400 CFS and you decide you want a fire factor of 5, then your new flow is going to be 12,000 CFS. So that's just a quick way that you can go through and figure out what your post-burn flow might be. There are, oh, oops, we'll go back real quick, sorry. So there are a few different like rules of thumbs that you can find on, you know, your 2-year storm or your 10-year storm or your 100-year 1% annual chance storm on what these typical factors might be. And what you're going to see under the reported factors is these were ones that were actually calibrated or determined after the fact. So for instance, you'll see on the 10-year return interval that the typical factors that were reported in a lot of the literature was 1.3 to 6. However, calibration of the Schultz fire, which was a big fire that happened a while ago in Arizona, came up with a factor of 32. And there's a reason for that, and that's because the Schultz fire took place in a old growth pine forest. So some of these lower factors like Santa Barbara and Goodwin, those types of things, they were more of kind of the desert scrub brush that we would expect to see. So these are some typical factors, and in order to determine it, it would be to kind of go out, do a Google search or whatever it may be, looking for papers that came up with a factor that's similar to a watershed like yours. And we can go to the next slide. So here is another peak flow factor method. I've put the link to this kind of guide that exists out there. This is on the USGS Bear Tools site. And it's a pretty good method where you find some regression equations for your area. So the state of Nevada has kind of a statewide regression equation. So you calculate the pre-burn condition, you collect your basin characteristics of the burned areas, so percentage of high or moderate burn severity. You determine what storm you want to look at. For instance, you know, do I really care about the big storm or do I want to know what the little storms are doing? So you're going to estimate your pre-fire runoff, determine your factor, and then you're going to multiply that to come up with your post-burn. We'll go to the next slide. So those were the quicker methods. Now we're going to get into some of the more detailed methods. If you have like a HMS model or an HEC1 model, something that has more detail in it, there's a lot of documentation on using the curve number method. So the curve number, this TR55 type of methodology, is something that's been around for a very, very long amount of time. And because of that, there are lots of publication studies and guidelines available that talk about how to modify the curve number based on your burn severity. So we'll go to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, we want to go and look online to find something that's similar to our watershed. So I don't want to use a modifier for a pine forest in a place that has more desert scrub in it. So this one popular method is called the Higginson and Jarnecki method, where whatever your pre-fire curve number was in your model, you're going to add to that based on the burn severity. We'll go to the next one. So here's just a quick application example. So the first step you want to do is create an overall curve number matrix. And this is typically based on your land use or your soils, you know, however you're going to do your hydrology model. And then in a spreadsheet, you can come up with a matrix on what the curve number was for the type of soil and the land use. And just simple addition for the Higginson and Jarnecki method gives you a new curve number, which you can plug back into your model. Go to the next slide. So once you've got that in there, if you're lucky enough to have a burn severity map, you can actually intersect your soils, your land use, your burn severity, and your drainage areas in GIS or a similar type of method to come up with this composite curve number and modification. We'll go to the next one. So then when you sum it up there, we've got this composite curve number of all of our areas with our land use and our soil and our burn severity. Once we put this and compute, you know, we're going to have some new flows that come out of this, but we're not done yet. one of the things you want to do is check your results against those factors that we talked about at the beginning. This is an example off to the right where we had kind of the post-burn situation and the pre-burn situation. And you'll notice that these basin IDs, not all of these subbasins were burned. So we only had the stuff highlighted in red here that indicates where the burn actually was. And so the overall effect, so in this example, was it was a 2.0 factor on the 100-year event, which fits in kind of with the rules of thumbs that we talked about. So let's look at some special post-fire adjustments. So we just strictly talked about burn severity in our last example. But another thing that can be done is the bulking of flows to account for sediment. And David is going to talk about some more debris flow type of situations. We're going to talk about kind of the video we saw, the very clear water. You know, it might be muddy water, but it still pretty much acts like water. So we know that the removal of vegetation and the changes in the soil account for some of these changes. And so what we can do in our modeling is apply what's called a bulking factor to account for sediment that's been picked up in the flood flows. So most hydraulic modeling software is for clear water simulations, and that's always been the case in the past. However, we do have sediment type of debris flow type of software simulations available now that will do these mud flow and debris flows with the change in the actual properties of the fluid itself. Another special adjustment might be your geometry. In our video, one of the comments was, yeah, that culvert handled it like a champ, which is great. We didn't notice any debris in that particular video, but a lot of times you're going to have a lot of debris in your flow, and that can clog these openings to the culverts. So what we might want to do in our model is actually, if there is a very small culvert or a very small bridge, if we want to reflect that blocked to account for that debris, that might be a good thing to do. So with that block, this particular situation on the right, we've got a nice contained flow, and it hits this new blocked structure, and suddenly we have flow going everywhere. So we took kind of a 1D channel contained situation and turned it in almost a 2D flow situation. This particular example is from Santa Barbara, and this actually did happen. So blocking the structure was a good thing to assume, because after the Thomas fire, we actually got to see that this did happen. So sediment and water flow mixture behavior can change. What David's going to talk about is up in the mud debris flow kind of flow regime. Landslides are a completely different mechanism. So post-fire landslides, they don't act any different. And then water flow or hyperconcentrated flow, we pretty much tend to model like normal water flow. And one of the things to remember is that in a post-burn situation, the stream can experience all these types of flow in a single event at different times and in different locations. So why do we care? Why do the 4 types of flow matter? Well, one is we might have greater extensive flooding and debris flow may occur after the fire. Our published risk maps, such as our FEMA flood insurance rate maps, may underestimate the post-burn risk, and we need to assess the possibility of both flooding and debris landslides in the changed watershed occurring. And we want to choose the correct model for your watershed. And as I mentioned before, there are non-Newtonian flow calculations available in a few different software programs. So HEC RAS as well as Flow2D can now model these mud flows, or non-Newtonian flows as they're called. If we want to do our sediment bulking factors, so we're going to assume we have clear flow. We don't think we're going to have a debris flow, but I do want to be cautious in my modeling for the post-burn. So what are the bulking factors that I can use? One thing I will say is there's a lot of theory behind bulking factors. However, what I like to look at these at is a safety factor. post-burn situation can be very dynamic, and maybe we don't know all these factors. So one of the things that I might want to do is use this bulking factor as a safety factor onto my flow. And there are a bunch of published methods. Most of these for sediment bulking, most of these came out of the Southern California area, and they're actually regression equations, meaning they were developed from data. So if you wanted to look these up to actually use them, there's some references right there. There's also a lot of real simple ways to come up with bulking factors. So the Bear team came up with a maximum of 1.7 with the equation shown right there. There were some bulking factors used in a FEMA study in 2003 that said 1.1 to 1.5 for bulking factors. Some studies 2.5, 2.14. Theory note, sediment concentrations over 40% become non-Newtonian flow. So in other words, we wouldn't want to use these Newtonian flow equations with non-Newtonian flow. So a bulking factor of 2 indicates 50% sediment by volume, but not to go into equations so much, like I mentioned, use them as a safety factor rather than strictly sticking to the theory. So this last slide here that we're going to talk about before we move on to David's presentation is an old growth kind of pine forest that had a fire in 2002, and the Forest Service team was actually able to go to these spots and look at the amount of recovery that happened. The typical rule of thumb is, oh, your watershed's recovered within 5 years. As you can see from this picture right here, though, with these old growth forests, 5 years was not a significant amount of time when it came to recovering the hydrology of the watershed. So that was just a quick primer of the post-burn hydrology. And if you have any questions for us, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Linda. We'll turn it over to David. It looks like we don't have any questions at this time, but please feel free to chat in any questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So David, I will turn it over to you. Do you want to drive your own slides?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
I will just share. Hi, are you all able to see this?
Yes, we can. Looks good on my end.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is David Cavagnaro. I'm a fourth-year PhD student here at UNR, studying debris, mostly post-fire debris flow hazards. And so Linda just gave a really great presentation on flooding and more of the modeling that's done to assess post-fire flood risk. And I'm going to focus a little more on research that we're currently undertaking to understand the more sediment-rich flows, such as debris flows. I think I'm just going to keep my video off in the interest of not having it freeze on me.
David, that sounds great. If you want to make your presentation full screen or in the presenter mode, then we can see your... Okay, awesome.
Okay, I can find the button to turn the video off. That's fine. I think it should be fine. So,
I just turned your video off.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yep, you're good.
I don't want it to freeze on me. All right, awesome. Great. So thanks everyone for the invite and everything. And so yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and share some of the research we've been working on here at UNR. So this is our kind of opening image of some of the most destructive debris flows that we've seen in the US. This is the Montecito event after the Thomas Fire, which Linda mentioned earlier. And you can see just the amount of debris that has been put into this neighborhood and how destructive it can be. So that's just sort of an idea of the types of problems we're working with. So here's all the different, this wouldn't be possible without all these different collaborators. Scott McCoy, my PhD advisor at UNR, and then a couple of other grad students at UNR, a group from USGS that has helped us a lot in the field, some people from California Geological Survey as well, and the National Weather Service. So, okay, so I'm just gonna start with a video here of a pretty extreme example of a debris flow. This is in Switzerland, and this is not in a post-fire area, but it's just in a basin that happens to experience debris flows pretty often. And you can, as you're watching, take a look at how much more sediment is in this flow than the video of the flood that Linda showed, and how much less water comparatively is in this flow, and how it makes the flow act very differently than a flood. So just go ahead and play this. So you can see becomes a little more watery over time after the initial surge, but the first surge is mostly comprised of rock and other debris. You can see just for scale, there's kind of a warning sign in the background here that's at least 10 feet tall or so. So that gives you an idea of the scale of this. This is a basin that people have been studying for quite a while. So why do we want to distinguish between floods and debris flows? I just mentioned that the physics of the flow are different, and because of that, the hazard created by the flow is often quite different than that of a flood. In this case, you have the actual sediment in boulders or wood in many cases is doing a lot of damage to the to structures and to infrastructure in a way that, yeah, it can really only be done by solid material, in addition to the water that's carrying it, and in addition to destroying many of these structures. These are mostly from the Montecito event. They just happen in a very unpredictable manner. So you can see that the last video I showed the channel goes from basically completely dry to inundated with rock almost instantly, with no real rising water level like you might see in a flood. And so we study these because they're the physics are completely different than a flood. We're studying them and how they might be, how the hazard might be different from flood as well. So Linda mentioned some of the mechanisms of how wildfire increases the hazard for both floods and debris flows. And so you can see all this vegetation has been removed from the landscape due to fire, and the surface is exposed to rainfall directly, so you don't have the canopy intercepting it. And also you have a reduced soil infiltration capacity due to chemical changes in the soil. And so that promotes runoff and makes soil easier to erode. So this is called a ravel cone, which is just soil under dry conditions moving downhill when it wasn't able to move downhill pre-fire. So this is without any rainfall. There's erosion happening, and this loads the channels with sediment in many cases, which can then be transported downstream in a debris flow event. So distributed runoff and eroded material can transform into a debris flow. And so here's another quick video. This is just for scale, showing people in the channel installing some monitoring equipment. This is down in the San Gabriel Mountains in Southern California. And then here is a automated video that was shot. And you can see the first little bit of this is pretty watery. There is some debris in here. And then it just sort of picks up in intensity over time. And you could see some pretty big boulders coming down the channel eventually. This is sort of a chain reaction in many ways. It's once the flow gets large enough, it's eroding. The flow itself is eroding material from the landscape, which is just added into the flow. So you can see an example of that in a second here, where there's a huge boulder that comes down, yeah, right here, that was picked up by the flow itself, or maybe eroded off of the banks of the creek. So now that I've sort of shown you videos of debris flows, we'll talk about how they're relevant to Nevada and the greater Nevada area. So Nevada is no stranger to post-fire debris flows. Here's 3 examples from the last few years in or very close to Nevada, all in the Reno area. This was on I-80, the Farad fire debris flow event. And then we had the Slinkard fire event above Topaz Lake on 395. And then the Slink fire had a pretty large debris flow last summer. Luckily was not in a very populated area at all. But you can see that these are quite common even in northern Nevada. And not all of the debris flows even happen after wildfire. There's this example in 2014 near Gardnerville of the debris flow that happened in an unburned area. So these are possible in any kind of steep landscape. The fire just makes them more common usually. And so what do we do to manage the risk of the debris flows? This is all Southern California, these pictures. They've built some pretty huge catch basins to just catch all the material and prevent it from going into the neighborhoods below. And they've been using these for decades. Here's an example of a check dam that is also built just to kind of remove energy from the flow as it's flowing down. And here's a basin before a debris flow and then after a debris flow in somewhere in the greater LA area. And you can see this tower that's supposed to drain water is almost completely covered by the material. So there's a lot of volume of material coming down in these flows. Here's an example of a bit of infrastructure that was put in at the Farad fire on I-80 in Reno, and it's a much smaller version of the same concept where you have this very small catch basin, a grate to prevent culverts from plugging, and then this sort of metal mesh structure that is just designed to deform under the flow and slow the flow down and remove energy from it. There hasn't been a debris flow in this basin since it was installed, so we can't really comment on how effective it may have been. So how do we predict these debris flows? I already mentioned that they're quite unpredictable in many ways, but there are some things that can guide our predictions. The main measure of a threshold for debris flow initiation is this rainfall intensity threshold. Most commonly, a 15-minute duration is shown to be the most accurate at characterizing a debris flow threshold. So in this case, there's rain duration in hours plotted on the x-axis here, and then rainfall intensity, which is in millimeters per hour. And any X represents an event that did not have a debris flow, and any circle represents an event that did have a debris flow. And you can use statistical methods to basically determine what the best guess of a 15-minute threshold would be. So in this case, it's around 18 millimeters an hour. This is from Southern California. So in that case, if there's a storm that's predicted to have an intensity of over 18 millimeters an hour in this case, agencies might issue a warning that a debris flow is likely. And so similar calculations have been made by our group in some of these northern Nevada and northern California events. Around an inch per hour in many of the more arid study areas that we've worked on seems to define the threshold for debris flow initiation. But we find that in more humid climates, not so much in Nevada, but more in Northern California, this threshold might be higher as the climatology becomes more wet, as you move into more wet areas. So in this case, we're just showing that 1 inch per hour rainfall is approximately a 1-year recurrence interval storm. So it does not take a spectacular storm to trigger a damaging event from a steep and burned landscape. So one way that we can in a more spatial manner, predict where debris flows are likely is through these burn severity maps that Linda mentioned. And so in this case, there's this BEAR team from CAL FIRE evaluating soil burn severity. And then this map of burn severity can be combined with a map of topographic steepness or slope, and different basins can be delineated with higher hazard basins in dark red here and lower hazard basins in this yellow color. So in this case, this map is showing the likelihood of a debris flow in response to a 24 millimeter an hour rainfall. And so given these USGS hazard assessments, people can identify where the risk might be, and that can help guide the type of infrastructure that I showed earlier and where it might be installed. And so some of the research we're working on is how long after the fire is there elevated risk of debris flows. And so Linda showed an image from an old growth forest that clearly the old growth trees will not grow, or trees in general will not regrow within a couple of years. But in terms of soil properties, this is just a compilation of a few fires in Northern California and Nevada that we've been studying, and we've gone back to make repeat measurements of soil hydraulic conductivity. And so at each of these fires, the white is the unburned soil, and then everything after that is different years after the burn. You can see just an illustration of how the hydraulic conductivity has gone down after the fire and then recovers back to unburned levels at varying rates. So you can see at Car Fire in Northern California, it recovered a lot slower than in more arid environments such as Taboose Fire. So that's an aspect that we're continuing to study of how does this recovery vary across a climate gradient. And so in general, we do see a pattern of recovery in soil hydraulic conductivity. How big do we expect debris flows to be? This isn't really research we're working on at UNR, but it's something that people at USGS are heavily involved in, just evaluating based on structural damage from some of these large events. These are all from Montecito, just the amount of energy dissipated by a debris flow compared with the damage that is done. So what can we expect in the future? So there's some studies that have come out showing that just the amount of burned area, just in square kilometers or acres of burned area, or however you want to measure it, has drastically increased over the past few decades as fires have grown larger and moved into climates that were traditionally not as prone to these very large wildfires. So just the amount of area upon which debris flow can happen is much higher than it has been in the past. In addition to that, extreme rain events and unpredictable rain intensities are seeming to become more common, just from the fact that in general, slightly warmer air can hold quite a bit more water vapor. So there's just that much more potential for high intensity rain. And so there's a lot of work coming out of USGS and other organizations to try and predict this, how much this hazard might increase in the future. This is just showing a very extreme rain event that triggered the Montecito debris flows, which was a 100-year return interval storm. And so in order to meet this growing hazard in the future, we need to continue to improve our predictions of where debris flows will occur and improve our mapping of where they have already occurred. So this is some research that we're doing on the Dolan fire in the Big Sur area of California in response to one rain event, and mapping the types of response in each channel, both through remote sensing and through field observation. And we can start to draw maps of exactly where there were debris flows and where there weren't debris flows. And in many cases, the areas where there weren't debris flows can help give us a whole lot of information in the case where debris flows were predicted by the best current models that we have, but then they weren't observed in response to a rain event. That's that provides sort of an opening for people to explain why that might be, and start to improve on these models. So you can see the debris flow response is pretty non-uniform across this study area. Anything in pink is a debris flow in this case. And then across the Western US, you could make the same observation of where there are debris flows and where there aren't debris flows in comparison to the burned area in the Western US. So to also to have a better way of mapping these debris flows, we need to know exactly what was a debris flow and what wasn't a debris flow. So if you go after the water has drained out and after the event, I'm showing two pictures here of a debris flow deposit from the Tamarack fire, which was in Alpine County, California, very, very close to Nevada. So this is a debris flow deposit where you could see these levees full of both pretty large boulders and that are all supported by matrix, so supported by dried mud, basically. And so that's just showing how sediment rich the flow was, versus in a flood, most of these boulders that are moving, if at all, they're moving on the bed of the creek or channel or river. So the morphology of the deposit is very different in a flood. So this is the Walker fire, also in California, but very close to the Nevada border, just showing more of a sandy deposit and a couple boulders that moved as bed load, but did not form these kind of lateral levees. So one piece of research we're working on that essentially a lot of times these debris flows empty out onto a road, and that has to be excavated away immediately in order to reopen the road. In many cases, towns can be cut off from these. So the deposit, there's no guarantee that the deposit will be preserved for very long. So we're working on some more numerical methods to determine the flow type long after the deposit has actually been washed away or excavated away. And so we can do this just by surveying the cross section of a flow. So in this picture, there's this is from the Dolan fire in coastal California. You can see a person for scale here, and then everything that's stripped down to bedrock has been eroded by a flow that happened about a year before this picture was taken. And so it's still very obvious where the trim lines, where the high water mark was. And so given this high water mark observed in the field, we can use sort of laser rangefinders or any kind of surveying tool to measure the cross-sectional area of this channel. And based on the cross-sectional area and the location of the channel, we can basically tell if this cross-section was too large to possibly have been created by a clear water flow, then we know it must have been a debris flow. So one example is that, say the upstream area of this basin is 1 square kilometer, and we have a rough estimate of the rainfall intensity. We can do a quick calculation to say that if this was flowing under the physics of clear water flow, how much discharge would be coming through this cross section. And then we can measure the cross section and use computational methods to estimate how much discharge per second was actually moving through this cross section during the event. And we can basically divide those two numbers And if that number is much larger than 1, then we know that the physics that we're operating here must not have been the physics of clear water flow, and it was acting as a granular flow, which causes a much deeper inundation and much larger cross section from a given rainstorm. So we can actually use this as a tool to determine whether something was a debris flow or a flood without having to look at these fragile deposits that might be cleared away. So here's just a summary of the measurement of floods and how this Q star number is almost universally less than 1. And then for debris flows, this number is almost universally greater than 1. And so this could be an important tool for future mapping to train future models of where there was a debris flow and where there was a flood and how that might be able to improve our models. So that's all I have for today. If you have any detailed questions that are a little more detailed than we can answer in a quick chat session, then here's our email addresses and I can put them in the chat as well. Feel free to talk to us about any questions you have. And if you have any quick questions now, feel free to put them in the chat because I believe we have some time. So thanks again for the invitation to share this work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Linda and David. That was so interesting to hear about. I'm going to be launching the knowledge check. So folks hoping to get those CEC credits, make sure you fill out the knowledge check. But do we have any questions in the chat for David and Linda while I launch these? If not, I have a question. So I live in Sacramento and wildfires are a pretty common thing, like in the Tahoe area, but I wouldn't necessarily consider that an arid region, especially compared to the climate of like Nevada. So I'm curious, what are the main differences in flood after fire between an area like Tahoe and a more arid region?
Hey there, this is Linda. There's actually kind of no difference except for in the hydrology. So if we're looking at storms, a lot of times, I guess the first presentation today was kind of on that tropical express that came through, where a lot of like southern Nevada and Arizona has more of the monsoon types of flows. So when you end up with a very high intensity storm, you know, you might have a greater debris flow type of potential. And one of the other differences is just the vegetation type itself. You might not see as big a response in post-burn flows for a desert scrub versus maybe the trees. So hopefully that answered what you were looking for.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and also I will add, I didn't really share it in this presentation, but it seems that in less arid regions, a slightly higher amount of rainfall is actually needed to trigger debris flows, possibly because of this vegetation interception or just due to soil, basically soil adjustment to the local climate, which has been shown a lot in the landslide work for unburned areas. But once the flow is occurring, there is not a difference in the physics or the way that it's flowing or anything, but the conditions to initiate it might be different, and that's something that being studied currently with all these new fires in the less arid regions. Actually, one other thing I will mention, because we saw it a lot in the Dolan fire in coastal California, which is very much not an arid region, is you do have the potential for more sort of large woody debris, log jam type of events in these very heavily forested areas. And whether or not that affects your overall hazard, I'm not sure, but it might mechanistically change aspects of the flow if you have a ton of logs creating a log jam and then releasing all that material at once. That's another possible thing, because it's sediment and any burned vegetation or logs or anything would also be picked up by the flow.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I see that George has his hand up. George, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. We did some work on this up in Oregon, and I noticed you had a spatial extent of where debris flows occurred and where they didn't occur in different drainages. And what we found was, I mean, one study, we actually put out a ton of tipping buckets, and we found that even in what would be considered a frontal storm, pretty uniform, stuff like that, you would have pulses and tremendous variation where, less than a half a mile away, one place it rained 6 inches and the other place it rained a half an inch or something like that. And also our big mechanism in the study I did, it was a big study we did for ODF, but we found that the big mechanism was in these hollows or zero order basins. We would find that that you would just get basically liquefaction in the hollow, and that's where they would start. And because they had a mass, they could just go to a certain spot, and when the slope and the stream power wasn't there anymore, that's where they would typically stop, unless there was some sort of constraint like a curve in the channel or something like that. So we kind of understood where they started and stopped because of that. But I was wondering, the big question I had was, how do you do a study like on spatial and why they don't occur when you know that even a uniform storm, so to speak, a frontal storm, can have variation inside it, and that's probably driving a lot of that because of the variation in intensity spatially. That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So yeah, I didn't show in this particular presentation, but we're using some actual spatially explicit maps of rainfall in this Dolan study. Some people have attempted to use radar for that, and the particular Dolan study area doesn't have very high quality radar coverage. So we've sort of pivoted into more gauge-based and hydrologic, like a WRF atmospheric model based mapping of exactly where the hotspots in rain were in that Dolan fire. So yeah, that's a great thing to note, because yeah, even in a very so-called uniform storm, you'll have areas that are more or less intense than others. In general, the trend in the Dolan fire is that many of the areas where there were more debris flows, many of them actually saw lower peak intensity, such as on the east side of the Dolan fire, which actually saw less rain but had quite a few debris flows. So that might be where climatology, the diverse climatology of that burn scar might be factoring into things. And then there's also, since that event, there are people like Amy East at the USGS in Santa Cruz and Noah Finnegan at UC Santa Cruz have been installing rain gauges in a very tight transect, like within a kilometer of each other or so, to try and study that variation in future storms. So yeah, that's a really good point. On your Oregon point, yeah, that's I remember seeing a talk pretty recently on sort of the more landslide initiated post-fire debris flows. And that's a whole other initiation mechanism that I didn't get into, and that, yeah, really needs to be studied more, I think. So yeah, thank you for that.
Great. We had one more question in the chat from Eric. He's asking, how are you advising DOT on road closures post-fire, i.e. Markleyville?
So we were never advising DOT on that. I think there are people at California Geological Survey, like Don Lindsay, who I can send you his info. He would probably have a much better answer to that question. I know in Markleyville, part of why the road was closed was because it was actively, a culvert was actively being replaced when the storm came. So it was sort of ripping up a part of the road that had already been excavated. It was like fresh open excavation. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things there that they can be advised on. We haven't really been advising any agencies on Markleeville, but I can give you the contact info for some people that that would definitely have a good answer to that.
I guess one thing I'd like to add is the DOTs are notorious for not asking for anyone's help because they have such big organizations for themselves. So advising on post-burn sometimes jurisdiction-wise depends on if you're asked for that help or not.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David and Linda. This was such an interesting presentation. I really appreciate you being here today. So I will turn it over to Hunter for closing remarks.